Shalom, great men of Yahweh. We are in the 14th book of Yisrayl, part 1, chapter 1. The sermon that was given 7/12/2014, July 12th, 2014. And this book of Yisrayl, this 14th book of Yisrayl, is Sin Never Again, part 2. And the chapter we're going over today, chapter 1, the title is Yahweh has the only solution to peace, the immigration problem, the sicknesses, and the diseases, but the world has rejected it all this time. And the great Kahan turns it over to the great Kahan, our beloved pastor and overseer, Yisrayl Hawkins, the greatest teacher in the world, the greatest teacher of peace. And pastor says, Shalom, everyone. Wow, joyful cheering and praise to Yahweh. Come on, praise Yahweh. You may be seated. You may be seated and praise Yahweh for that praise to Him. I know he's very excited about his family right now. I can see that in Scripture. But I can also see in the heavens. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. And then going over to verse 3 here on page 1 of the 14th book of Yisrayl, part 2, pastor says, the world seems, and in verse 2 he talked about some of the pictures and the galaxies and the things that we've been seeing through these signs from heaven that Yeshua is showing to his house in these last days. And in verse 3 he says, the world seems like they can't think of anything but war and fighting while they talk peace. And 2 years later, almost, same thing. The world can't think of anything but wars and fighting, and they're talking peace. And if you remember before the feast, we watched the news and the Pope was talking about a political solution. Okay, I remember pastors always said, it's not a peaceful solution they're looking for. They're looking for a political solution where the Catholic Church comes out on top and dominance, and they can spread throughout the earth and be this world-ruling empire again. And of course, it's getting worse. We know it's going to get worse, but we also know that Yahweh offers His house a place of protection, and that's why Yeshua is showing us so many things. Okay, and Yahweh offers His house a place of protection, and that's why Yeshua is showing us so many things. And praise Yahweh for the feast that we just had. We were able to rejoice for 10 days there before Yahweh. Praise Yahweh for the great feast. And we gotta take the joy and the zeal that we got from the feast, and we gotta stretch it out. Another 37 days until the next great feast. Because the feast is an example of what the kingdom is going to be like. Joyful learning and service to the fellow man. Teaching and learning, and rejoicing together in unity. And that's how the kingdom of Yahweh is going to be. And that's what we're working towards. And the feast always give us a little glimpse. And even every feast, pastor always talks about how this is the greatest feast or the best feast yet. And we see how the feast, they get better year by year. And we can see the rejoicing, the unity, the working together in unity. All these things get better year by year, feast by feast. And they're all little glimpses of what Yahweh's great kingdom is like. Okay, and the jobs we're going to hold forever. Because like pastor said many times before, Yahweh hasn't called us to do the jobs that we're doing maybe day to day, Sunday through Thursday or Sunday through Friday. Yahweh's called us to be teachers, to be priests in His eternal kingdom, to teach others how to live a righteous, abundant, joyful life. Okay, and so we have to remember that through the week, because sometimes we get in our, day-to-day job, might not be the most exciting thing, and we might start to allow our zeal to diminish. But we have to remember the joy Yahweh is offering us. And this joy isn't offered in the world. You can go all over the world and you'll never find the peace, joy, and unity we see at the feast. Now, Yeshua is showing us so many things, and He told us to look up because He was going to show us these things. 1900 years ago, He told us that. The things we see in the heavens right now with my face in it, that's of course to glorify man. That's what Yahweh says He's going to do with His house. The prophet Daniel wrote that you're going to shine like the stars of heaven. Remember that. He was talking about you, Daniel, the people led by the two witnesses. I looked down, and the last I saw were two others and one teaching. That's what he said. Well, of course, meaning the house of Yahweh. And just before that, he said, you're going to shine like the stars of heaven. Glorify or glory that Yahweh is going to give you. Okay, so we can see that Yahweh He has these places that we heard on the feast, these offices and positions reserved in His kingdom. Okay, and they're reserved for us, but we have to make sure that our name stays written in the book of life, that it's not blotted out by our day-to-day striving to overcome carnality and God worship and this Christian mindset that we're born with or we were trained to have. I think a lot we're born with. It's kind of interesting in the news you'll see they'll ask politicians, like, do you think that people are born this way? Speaking of certain kinds of different ways the world has gone, and the politicians, they don't usually want to answer those questions. But I think last week or the week before, I think it was this week, the guy, he said, well, I think it's probably possible. And if you think about the confused, remember Yahweh had a perfect genealogies. We just went over the genealogy series in the 14th book of Yisrayl, part 1 in the back. Yahweh had a perfect genealogy, right, that brought forth Yeshua. Well, Satan has a perfectly confused, mixed up, messed up plan where she's bringing forth, where people are being born and they think that they're supposed to live like this or live like that. And everyone who has any sense of morality or any sense of morals, they know that that's hurtful towards themselves, others, and the environment. Okay, and so they of course, they don't have Yahweh's laws. So what do you see in the world? People who are against certain sins, like let's say homosexuality. Instead of teaching the consequence that comes from that sin, they're like all out, God said to hang them, and kill them, and, God hates this and God hates that, which they're true. Their gods do hate things. But as Pastor showed us this feast, Father Yahweh is very loving and merciful. And yes, he does say, don't do this and don't do that. But he tells you why not to do it and what comes from doing it. And this is what the House of Yahweh is showing to the world. This is what Pastor's bringing out, that it's not that just it's written there because Yahweh, the Creator, didn't like this type of people because they were from that part of the earth. No, he knew that if they exchanged, if they turned away from the perfect way he set, and they went off in their own lusts and their desires, that they were going to mess things up, and it was going to come down to this point we see today where for, as Pastor just showed us, 1900 years when Yeshua told us that he would be showing us these things in the heavens, well, for 1900 years, they've had continual breeding program of confusion. All those that were outside of Galilee, all those that weren't taught by Yeshua and his disciples, all those who followed after the Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and Herodians. And they've come down to the point now where you have children, they're not just born with, a carnal mind and overdrive. They're born with a carnal mind and overdrive that's just driving their bodies into the ground, where you see younger and younger now, children are coming up with these horrible sicknesses and diseases, that used to only be thought only older folks got, or people who, lived a little while and got some experience or some years under their belt. But Pastor says, I tell you what, this is in verse 4 on page 2, 14th book of Yisrayl, chapter 1. I tell you what, let's start right there with Hebrews. Turn over to Hebrews chapter 10, and we'll read this. I got about 30 minutes. I think I can cover this. Our Sabbaths are getting fuller all the time, every week, so we're going to have to speed up, laughing. We're going to have to hurry. And if you've noticed, the work of Yahweh has always been fast-paced. Hurry, hurry, work, work. There's always things to do, and there's always a job to be done. There's always a place for us to fill. In Hebrews chapter 10 and verse 24, he says, and let us consider one another, how we may urge one another on toward love and righteous works. Okay, remember what love is, okay? Remember what Apostle Yachanan wrote in 1 Yachanan 5 verse 3, that the love of Yahweh is the keeping of his laws. This is love, that we keep Yahweh's laws, okay? Because the world, they call their unlawful lust true love. How can you stand between true love? And so their unlawful lust, which is breeding sickness and disease, this is what they've called love. Okay, remember the prophets foretold this, that they would take and make the things which were evil look righteous, and the things which were righteous look evil. And that's what we see in the world today. Those who stand up for righteousness, morality, modesty, oh, you're cruel, you're evil, you're horrible. Those who just go about whatever's consenting between two adults, or whatever your heart desires or your mind can imagine, well, you deserve to live like that. But in Hebrews chapter 10, it says, let us consider one another, how we may urge one another on toward love and righteous works. This is what we learned here at the feast, of how, as a body, as a unity, we have to work together, brothers. We have to work together to get this work of Yahweh done, and we have to be able to urge each other on, because some days we might be having a great day and our brother next to us might be having a not so great day, so we need to be able to lift up each other, and also try to strive hard to lift up ourselves so that we can, as Pastor always said, even if you don't feel great, put a smile on your face, because you don't want to spread negativity or make a contagious frowny face spread around. Well, that's what Yeshua himself, as high priest over the house of Yahweh right now, that's what he's doing when he shows us these things in the heavens. You understand he's doing it, but he wants us to do it. He wants us to encourage one another. One another. Don't let one another sin. Okay, so encourage one another on towards love and righteous work. So encourage one another to keep Yahweh's laws. Okay, to humble themselves to keep Yahweh's laws and to continue pushing forward doing this righteous work. Don't let one another sin, If you have to, take a hold of an arm and shake them a little and say, listen, get your mind on the right track here. What you're bringing forth is not right. You're going to knock yourself out of the kingdom, out of an office here, an office that's just about to be given. Okay, he said, grab him by the arm, so I don't want to see none of you brothers slapping each other during the week, I was trying to slap some sense into him like Pastor said. He said, grab him by the arm and give him a shake. Shake him a little. We're on the last part. We're in the last part of the last generation. And we all should realize the urgency of this thing we're facing here. Remember Matthew 24, 33, and 34. This generation is not going to pass away until all of these things are fulfilled. When Yahweh created man, he created him for a reason. Well, of course, and this is what mankind's lost because, of course, in the last 50 years, it's occurred at a more abundant pace because they've done away with the Ten Commandments. They've done away with the reading of the Scriptures. They brought forth not only so someone has an unlawful lust in their mind, well, they've brought that forth and magnified it and actually taught people to fulfill unlawful lust. And that's what we see in Hollywood, in the music industry, in the schools even. Sadly, in the schools you see where children are being taught things at kindergarten, preschool levels, that are totally abominable, but yet the Scriptures, the Bible, separation of church and state. We can't have the Bible in here. And even certain states like Texas that we live in here, Texas actually gets a little, they get a little bit of some mockery from the rest of the country because, they actually allow the Bible to still be taught in schools, which we know they're not teaching Yahweh's laws, they're teaching their Christianity, but, it's a step in the right direction. They can start opening their Bibles and reading those a little more. Maybe they'll start realizing why Yahweh created man. When Yahweh created man, he created him for a reason. Well, of course, that was to give him authority, so he would shine as the stars of heaven because of his great knowledge and wisdom that Yahweh would give him to guide the universe. Remember Genesis 1:26? Yahweh created man in his image and likeness that he would give him rulership. And I remember once a Christian, he said, well, that's why it's okay that we're sinners, because God created us in his image. So God's a sinner, and he created us to be sinners. They totally take and they confuse things. Remember what Pastor said there, I think it was this feast he was covering, in Genesis 1:27, where it says, so Yahweh created man in his own image. In the image of Yahweh, he created the man, then he created the woman from the man. Well, in the King James Bible, they make it as if the gods created man. Okay? Let's see here. Forgot to bring my King James here, but I think I have one in my pocket. It says, Genesis 1:27. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created him he, male and female created he them. The older King James, though, says, and the gods saw what they had made. So they make it look as if the gods created man. They take away Yahweh's righteousness and his authority, because we see Yahweh created man. He created man for a purpose. But, of course, they want people to forget what their purpose is, and they just want you to go and fulfill your own lust, your own desires, whatever your heart imagines. It says, Yahweh would give him to guide the universe, and the universe is now waiting for the manifestation of the Son of Man. Son of Man. These are the kinfolks that was passed down to us. We're part of those kinfolks. There are kinfolks, the sons of men. And we're the last part. We're the finishing, of course, of this great priesthood that he promised to Abraham, that we'd be that we'd be a blessing to all the universe, we're going to be that blessing by bringing forth the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program to all the universe. All the universe, not just in our own lives or, to the United States or even to the earth, but to the entire universe. We're going to bring forth the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program. If you remember what Pastor said, the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program are the statutes and judgments that govern Yahweh's laws. So we're going to be bringing this to man so they can see how to use Yahweh's laws in their life, and they can avoid, and not just man, but all creation, all the universe, so they can avoid the mixture of righteousness and evil they've gone off in, and hence why we see, as Pastor said, we see the whole universe is filled with sin and God worship, and the gods have gone from planets to planets and galaxies to galaxies, and they spread this confusion, the perversion, and the darkness, this immorality throughout the universe. Okay, but we, using the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program, are going to be the blessing to the universe by bringing this to them. So the first step is us using it in our own lives. That's the first step. Using our own lives so we can teach others how to use it. Now going on to page 3 in verse 11. We're going to jump over here to verse 11. Pastor says, now anyway, back to Hebrews chapter 10 and verse 24. This is Yeshua doing this here. He says, not forsaking the gathering of ourselves together. Don't forsake this. Yes, you'll die if you do. Every time you miss an appointment with Yahweh, you miss out on a wonderful blessing that you would be using later in the kingdom if you were here or if you get here. This should be the most important thing in your life. Praise Yahweh. Okay, so the Sabbaths and the feasts, these are the most important things in our lives. And also remember the new moons. Remember Colossians chapter 2. Not forsaking the gathering together of ourselves for the Sabbaths and the new moons. In Isaiah chapter 66, verse 23, about from one Sabbath and one new moon to another, all flesh will come worship before me. These are appointments with Yahweh. These are wonderful blessings that we're going to use later in the kingdom if we're here or we get here or we get to Yahweh's house. Of course, those who are close enough and those who are spread throughout the earth, praise Yahweh, they've been blessed to be able to get through Yahweh's house through the means of streams of the internet and the satellites and the DVDs and MP3s. They're able to be here with us, even though many are held back in different lands and different countries that don't allow them to travel here or make it almost impossible for them to come here to keep the feast. But this is spread out so that they're able to partake in this as well. Verse 13, well, he says, not forsaking the gathering of ourselves together. This is Hebrews chapter 10, verse 24. I have a job for you. I want to train you for my kingdom. Now that was the number one goal. Yahweh's number one goal for mankind, to train you for his kingdom. Okay, number one, to train us for his kingdom. This is why he brought us to his house. It's the number one reason why we're here, to be trained for Yahweh's kingdom. Go to verse 16, Pastor says, anytime you disobey Yahweh and you don't bring forth a peaceful solution, this Peaceful Solution Character Education Program that he offers you, you will have trouble. Okay? Anytime a person disobeys Yahweh and doesn't bring forth a peaceful solution, he will have trouble. He or she, whoever the individual might be, they're going to bring trouble in their life. Okay? By disobeying Yahweh and not bringing forth the peaceful solution. And remember what Pastor told us, that he is Yahweh to us and we are Yahweh to him, and we must be Yahweh to one another. Remember that throughout our training process, we're given different tests and trials, to humble ourselves to one another, as it might be. Maybe our supervisor or those managing over us or an authority over us, or maybe us as authorities and authority over others. We're supposed to be Yahweh to one another. But also remember that we as individuals receiving instructions, we're being judged on how we follow the instructions Yahweh gives us. Okay, we're being judged on how we follow the instructions that are given to us through our authorities. Okay, and so we can only control our own actions, our own thoughts, okay, our own feelings. Okay, we're not going to change, I don't like the way he does this or he does that. You can't change an individual. Okay, it's going to be up to them to change themselves, but we ourselves, I always say if you don't like the way someone's doing something, all right, then make sure you don't do that yourself. But don't think that you're going to change me and make me change a certain way. I can only change me and you can only change you. If you remember one of the great head judges said at feast, that only you can choose for you and I can choose for me. Okay, we can't choose for each other. And it's always easier. I remember years ago, the great priest telling me that it's always easier to see others' faults. Okay, especially you notice this in a family, where faults kind of jump out at you. And this is what, if you dwell on these things, it destroys a family. This is what we see in the world, why divorce is at an all-time high, where 50% of marriages end in divorce, because they're always looking at each other's faults instead of trying to grow together in unity. Now, of course, they don't have Yahweh's laws, so there's no way for them to grow in unity, really. But, us as training to be righteous heads throughout all eternity, we're training with our person to our right, a person to our left, the guy in front of us or behind us. We're training through our interactions. You don't think you can go to work and act a certain way and then go home and act a different way. No, if you act improperly at work, it's going to follow you home, and you're going to act improperly at home. So start working together to be obedient to the instructions we're given and bringing forth a peaceful solution. And the peaceful solution is, remember what it says in the beginning of every book? 2 wrongs don't make a right. So you saw that I did something wrong. Well, if you do something wrong too, it doesn't make it right. Okay? Or I saw you did something wrong. Well, if I do something wrong too, it doesn't make it right. We have to be right, be righteous. Remember Pastor's dad said, be right, be righteous. Practice, how are we righteous? 1 Yochanan 3:7, he who practices righteousness is righteous. Practice righteousness, practice the peaceful solution with one another. And of course you're going to see, well, he's not doing this, or he's not doing that, or she's not doing this, or she's not doing that, or they're not doing this, or they're not doing that. So what? That's not what Yahweh's judging us on. What are we doing, We can't walk around with a mirror all the time. That'd be kind of dangerous. You'd probably fall and break and cut something. But, really examine ourselves. We have to do this. And I'm speaking for myself too, man. I'm not on some kind of a beat 'em bash 'em train here. We have to examine our own actions and making sure that we're not doing those things. Remember the scripture says to take the beam out of your own eye before you look at the speck in your brother's. So every time we see a fault in someone, just realize that we probably have 3 other faults, okay? Remember you point your finger, you got 3 pointing back at you, so we see that fault, but we got 3 other faults that we need to learn to overcome. So let's get in these classes and put these teachings of the peaceful solution to work in our lives, okay? Because remember, anytime a person disobeys Yahweh and doesn't bring forth a peaceful solution, he will have trouble, okay? And that is a promise. If you go over to verse 19, and praise Yahweh for all the classes that we've been blessed with here. We truly are blessed to have these classes so that we can learn, where it's not like there's any opportunity to forget. If you get involved and you get in the classes, and we all have things that we can be doing, or maybe even we think we have to be doing, but we really have to get in these classes. I remember a question was asked to pastor once, about, Pastor, do you want these guys to be out working, or you want them to be in class? He said, well, I want the work done, but I also want them to get in class. So we have to balance these things, and it can be done, man, because if you put forth the effort, Yahweh will bless your efforts, and he'll make it possible. Okay, because I know we all run busy schedules, but the classes really help to build and help our week go so much better, because we're able to learn these things, and then we're able to put it into action into our day-to-day life. We're truly blessed. I've never seen where we've had such a great opportunity. As Pastor said, right now we have the greatest opportunity for people to come to Yahweh's house, get in these classes, and learn the peaceful solution. Okay, the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program, and it's never been so available as it is here today at the House of Yahweh. Now in verse 19 it says, Yahweh said to Cain, he had to go hunting Adam and Eve so he could train them for his kingdom. Remember, they weren't showing up for their appointments on the Sabbaths, or the feasts, or the new moons. The most rewarding thing man could ever look for, Yahweh's kingdom. That's the most rewarding thing you could ever look for. It's offered to all mankind, and they wouldn't come to the house to get it. No, they went off, You're only allotted a short length of time, and if you waste the time gathering gold and silver, or chocolates and candy, or whatever it is, gold and silver could be, anything that distracts you from what Yahweh's called you here to do. Yes, it represents money, but it also can represent any other thing, that's pulling us away from our training. Remember, Yahweh's brought us here to qualify for these great positions in His kingdom. But if you waste your time in gathering gold and silver, I can guarantee you, you're going to be casting into the street one of these days, hating the fact that you didn't enter the house to get the Peaceful Solution character education program. I don't know, years ago there was a film, Schindler's List, and it was about the Holocaust. And I don't know if anyone ever seen that, but I remember at the end, the man, he was buying back Jews from the Germans, supposed Jews, buying Hebrews from Hebrews, right, that called themselves different things. Of course, pastors taught us, but he was buying them back as workers to work in his factories. And when it came to a certain point, and he'd seen how many had got killed, he started kind of realizing where he had wasted money and efforts into things he could have done to help people, but he didn't see it till after the fact. He did a great thing, but he actually was miserable with himself that, he should have got rid of, his fancy watch and his jewelry and, whatever that he didn't need, and he could have been able to help that many more people. Okay, and we have to remember that what Pastor says right here, I can guarantee you one day you're going to be casting into the street, one of these days, hating the fact you didn't enter the house to get the Peaceful Solution character education program. If we waste the opportunity to come and learn, one day we're going to be hating the fact that we wasted the opportunity to come and learn. And this is why pastors made it so available for us to have these classes. Page 4, verse 19. I guarantee you the teachers who teach the classes, they're not so bored that they need to have class every other night. They live very busy, busy lives, and it's a blessing that they take their time to come and teach us the Peaceful Solution character education program. So, it's not, we are in the certification classes trying to qualify to be certified teachers, but, it also, remember what Pastor said years and years ago, when you stop teaching someone, or when you start teaching someone to stop sinning, you stop sinning yourself. When you start teaching someone the Peaceful Solution character education program, you start teaching yourself. Okay, we're only allotted a short length of time. Don't waste that time gathering gold and silver or any other time-wasting things that you can find to do. Make it, schedule it in your schedule. You got to get this learning in. Page 5 and verse 36. In conclusion here, men, Pastor says, he's talking about all the solutions mankind's coming up with for their problems. We need more policemen to stop the shootings. He said, it's like getting a bigger weapon or teaching your child karate to take care of himself. Karate, a person's got to have the brain capable of a skunk to ever think that would work. Teach your children karate, right? Teach them to fight, right? And ooh, ha, 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 slap and hit back, right? Be tougher, go to the gym and get stronger, he brought a bat. Well, bring a big old stick that's longer than that bat. Teach him to fight. You're teaching him to get killed is what you're teaching him to do. He who lives by the sword will die by the sword. Listen to the words of your Savior for a change. Praise Yahweh, applause. So remember, if we're teaching our children to fight or do karate, you're teaching him to get killed. And also remember, because I know, some of us, or maybe a lot of us, maybe we don't have children that we're teaching right now at the present moment, 24/7. But remember what Pastor said. He said, all these children in Yahweh's house we're teaching through our examples. We might not be sitting in front of them 30 minutes or an hour or any time of length of day, but we're teaching them through our examples. And if we teach them to fight, we're teaching them to get killed. So let's teach the Peaceful Solution in our words, our actions. Yahweh bless you, men. You have a great Sabbath day. At this time, I have the great honor and privilege to turn it over to one of Yahweh's great priests, the great Kohan, Betziel Hawkins. Shalom, great Kohan.
Shalom, men. You may be seated. Great men of Yahweh, what's the world gotten itself into? Those words of the great Matithia, Kohan Matithia is really resonating in my brain here, listening what he had to say there, seeing so much just taking place in the world today. We're in the 14th book of Israel, part 2, and chapter 1, Yahweh has the only solution to peace, the immigration problem, the sickness and the diseases, but the world has rejected it all this time. So what is it they're rejecting? And what's behind this whole mess that we're seeing in the world today? We're on page 6. This sermon was given on 7/12/2014, so not, fairly recent history. Well, let's look back to the beginning in Genesis, and let's see where this idea that we're experiencing today got started. Genesis 3, verse 5. Sometimes we call this the first big lie. I'm sure the first big lie was the one that Satan told herself. For he knows, she's talking to Eve here, and she says, he knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be as gods, Elohim, knowing righteousness and evil. Say what? Be like the gods, knowing righteousness and evil, seeing that mixture. And I doubt that this came from the pattern we've seen opened up to us in these last days from the House of Yahweh and seeing the scriptures revealed to us. I doubt that this took place in just a casual afternoon conversation under a willow tree, over a cup of tea. I think this is probably worked in through influences, through some kind of coercion, a lot like we see occurs today, the pattern that we see and how deception creeps in. If it came all of a sudden, we'd duck and run for cover and reject it. But it's when it comes in subtly and carefully over time through friends or family or acquaintances and a little bit here, a little bit there, and then it starts working on your mind and eating away. If you don't attend to that and get that cleared up, get those questions cleared up, it just tends to fester and work away at you. And so now the whole world is following this deception, and when they get into real trouble, they start calling out to their gods, looking for intervention, looking for help. And they haven't come up with an explanation yet what it means when the Lord helps them here, apparently, but doesn't help them over here, apparently, because this person, got a quote-unquote blessing, and this person over here, something terrible occurred to them. Well, I want to caution you about this idea of blessing. What the world calls a blessing is completely different than a true blessing, or what we would experience in the house of Yahweh. What the world considers a blessing is something to their advantage, winning the lottery, or being protected, or maybe not protected, just time and circumstances occur to all, correct? And so maybe they just barely miss an accident, and they consider themselves blessed. Or they even consider, when they go to the grocery store and they get an extra $5 in change by mistake, they consider that a blessing, because, boy, I sure needed that $5. But where does their blessings come from? We know that they come from Yahweh. How would they come? As a result of, Yahweh's will or determination. Maybe he wanted to bless someone for a particular purpose, like Eob. He was blessed up to a point in his life, and then he was still blessed when Yahweh allowed trials and tribulations to come upon him. Say, what? What do you mean still blessed? That man suffered terribly. But look what he learned through the process and the character he developed. Pastor told us years ago, when you come to me, he said, people come and they want me to bless them, he said. And then they wonder what's occurring when something comes upon them. And they don't recognize right away that, they expected him to make life easy on them. And what he gave them was a challenge or a trial, something that was hard for them to deal with at first. But through it, if they endured, their character developed. They learned a few lessons maybe, and then they increased in their strength. And so we look back and see, wow, that really turned out to be a blessing. How was it for Yeshua? It turned into a blessing for all of us with what he was willing to endure. And so a true blessing comes as a result of keeping and upholding Yahweh's laws between ourselves and Yahweh, or between ourselves and one another. And it also comes simply if Yahweh chooses to bless you in a certain way. And it may come as a great surprise. It may come as a very nice thing. It may come as a very difficult trial. And it may not be till later that you see the blessing in it. And some of those things we're still waiting to see where the blessing is in some of the things that we suffer. Now, throughout this lesson here this evening, I have 5 main points that I want you to pay attention to and to realize. Point number 1, no one wins a war. Everyone comes out the loser in war. And of course, you can think of this just to yourself, what you've experienced in your lifetime with wars and rumors of wars, the things that we hear about in the news, maybe things that you experienced in your own personal life. Maybe some of you have experienced military service or war. While we're in Genesis, we can recall here in Genesis chapter 4, verse 14, surely you have driven me out this day, Cain says, from the face of the ground. I shall not be seen by your face, Yahweh. I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond on the earth, for there shall be continual war, vengeance, and retaliation. And Yahweh said to him, it is established, Cain. Vengeance shall be taken upon him sevenfold, and Yahweh shall set a mark on Cain, lest anyone find him and should kill him. Now, that's a great study for your book of Israel. Israel says there's much more to that. But factually so, he stated, from now on, it'll be continual war, vengeance, retaliation. They got the ball rolling here, and it's picked up speed ever since. Now, something we're going to see throughout this lesson is something that Yahweh clearly spells out here in Deuteronomy 28. And it's amazing that more people don't take this to heart. Even those that read it don't really capture the full intensity and the full impact of this. In Deuteronomy 28, verse 1, and it would probably be helpful if they get a book of Yahweh, because it speaks it so plainly you can't miss it. If you will listen diligently to the voice of Yahweh your Father. And of course, if you have decent sense here, you'll realize that it isn't Yahweh speaking to you himself. He's speaking through the one sent. And that voice is crying aloud in the wilderness of sin and the trouble we see. And some are receiving that and rejoicing in that. So listen diligently to the voice of Yahweh your Father by observing and doing all his laws, which I command you this day, that Yahweh your Father will set you high upon the nations of the earth as his kings and priests. And all these blessings will come upon you and accompany you because you obey Yahweh your Father. You know, if a mother said to little Johnny, you better obey, or when your father gets home, you're going to get a whooping. Don't you think the child would say, okay, well, what do you want me to do? What am I supposed to obey? Well, just you never mind, you just obey. So the child would probably say, okay, well, I'll better obey, but she hasn't told me to do anything yet. You know? And they'd be waiting to hear, for the next instruction. And here, Yahweh, our Heavenly Father, is saying that you will be blessed if you obey. Shouldn't the question come to mind? Obey what? I've been keeping the Ten Commandments all my life. Really? I've been keeping the Sabbath? Well, I think so, So there's a little bit more to it than that. So this bears some questions already here. But it also provides a lot of answers. When the world sees themselves in trouble with their children, the fruit of their body, the produce of their ground, blessed will you be when you come in and when you go out. It talks about relationship with your enemies. Why are they your enemies? And Yahweh shows you right here how to avoid these pitfalls. In the acceptance book of the Peaceful Solution Character Education, on Lesson Plan 1A, it ties in well with this lesson here tonight. We currently live in a world where the inability to accept ourselves and those around us has led to problems ranging from depression and low self-worth to violence and war. Children who are unable to appreciate their positive character traits because they haven't been taught or haven't learned them, and who do not think that life has meaning and value will inevitably make decisions that will rob them of a purposeful, fulfilling life. And in the self-control unit, Chapter 6, Lesson Plan 6, page A, similarly, we read, this lesson focuses on the effect a lack of self-control has on society as a whole. 3 specific areas will be addressed: crime, school violence, and road rage. 3 very common things we see in the news today. Students will also learn how self-control, or the lack of it, can affect interactions between nations. Here's the answers to the conflicts that we see between nations today. They will be introduced to the art of diplomacy. I assure you that those competing for public office today are not practicing diplomacy. And regrettably, what is called diplomacy today is often a compromise and a steering away from the laws of peace that would solve their problems. But the purpose of this peaceful solution is to give our young people these skills, to train them in these skills, and to challenge them to practice skills that will be used by them as ambassadors of peace in the future. Because Yahweh does have a solution. He doesn't just leave it to Cain and leave it alone. He gave instruction, he gave correction, but for 6,000 years, the people of this earth have followed this same senseless mess in vengeance, war, and retaliation. So when they really got in trouble here in the local area, and we were going through drought, and to a degree still are, of course, the effects have not ceased, the churches started telling their attendees to pray for rain. And so Pastor put a challenge, and he said, prove your point here. Ask for an inch of rain, and then, publish us. Show what you get. But tell them you want rain without the hail this time, because this is getting pretty costly. An inch of rain cost us $400 million in Abelin in damage repair. Broken windows, broken roofs, leaking roofs, property damage. Now, to put this in perspective, Taylor County makes up 919 square miles. Pastor tells them to call for an inch of rain. So imagine 1 inch thick, 1 inch deep, an inch of rain over 919 square miles. That comes out to $3 trillion. No. Did I get that right? Okay. Million, billion, trillion. Yikes. That's what comes after trillion? Is it a quadrillion? Yeah, 3 of those. I didn't think I have any problem with this. I haven't practiced it. 689 trillion, 315 million. Oh, did I get that right? 942 million, 315 billion. Yeah, okay, it's a big number. Cubic inches. And that makes up a total of 15 billion, 971 million, 1,399 gallons of water. So that comes out to be 2.5 cents a gallon. That sounds like a great deal to me. 2.5 cents a gallon is pretty cheap, but it costs Abelin $400 million for that 1 inch of rain. Does that sound like a blessing to you? An answer to prayer? Well, it may be an answer to their prayer, but I don't think it's what anybody really had in mind. Yahweh could make it rain. He could stop it too, but he can make it rain. But what is he going to tell us that stopped the rain? He's going to explain to us, he's showing us through his house, that the sin is causing these problems. Cry out to your gods, but they can't help you. And Yahweh won't answer them. He set the firmament in order to provide for the rainfall. But you've sinned. You multiplied your sins in this generation, and a multiplication of those sins have gone into the heavens. Isaiah 34, verse 16. This is a scripture that Pastor encourages us to memorize. Read the book of Yahweh. Search out the book of Yahweh and read. Not one of these will be neglected. For it is written, Yahweh is their shepherd. Whose shepherd? They shall not want. For his mouth has commanded it, and his spirit has gathered them. That's where this is, in the house of Yahweh. But what did they do? They changed the name of the house of Yahweh to the temple. They got rid of the name of Yahweh, and they spread this deception and confusion. The next point that I want you to realize this evening is that Yahweh is the only power in the universe. And we see this spoken of repeatedly in Isaiah 44, Isaiah 45, Isaiah 64, verse 4, and 1 Corinthians 8:4. He's the one that could actually stop these things and will stop them through the work that he is accomplishing by teaching his laws of peace to the house of Yahweh. And right here in verse 50, Pastor talks about starting with 400 children. They're being rejected by others to work and train them to go back to their country. Israel doesn't give up on anyone. And he's showing here how you could teach and train these young people to then go back to their countries, their homeland, and teach and train others. And through this process of proper knowledge and carrying it out properly, you could rebuild the whole atmosphere and rebuild this atmosphere of morals and structure in society that would bring peace and joyful living to everyone. But your own iniquities have separated you from your fathers, and your hands are defiled. And, you think of the immigrants, the refugees, rather, coming out of these nations. with such an uncertain future. And sometimes you'll see the young people on the news, and they think that getting an education, going to another country, to Germany or some other, France or someplace, and getting enrolled in a university is going to be their salvation. They think that's their big opportunity for them. But what has gotten us further into these messes than this higher education? It's not solving the problems. They're continuing to promote the idea that they're going to solve the problems, but they keep stacking one upon the other. And so these are the many confusions and lies and deceptions that are being perpetrated on mankind, and their courts and their churches are filled with lies. They continue to preach the false, the holidays, teaching that Santa Claus comes down chimneys and Easter eggs, are laid by bunnies. Is that not a lie? Your whole life is filled with lies. Satan is a liar and a teacher of lies. And that was straight from the Savior. And he points out the confusion in these people, like this judge is apparently an educated person, promoting the idea that pedophilia and incest are fine, and you can just take the babies that result from them, and kill them with abortion. This is the kind of confusion. And he says, I think a man's brain is about the size of a mouse. Well, I'll give you that. I think the mouse has more sense than this, unless he's infected with Toxoplasma gondii, because remember what occurs to, you can put a mouse in a maze and he'll find his way through, and if he finds a pitfall one time and gets out of it, he won't go back there again. But mankind, like this mouse that gets a confused mind where he walks right up to a cat because he's got this parasite, Toxoplasma, in his brain. People are the same way. They get these parasites in their brain from unclean foods, and they walk headlong into disaster, and they fall into a pit. And then they get out, they turn around, and they fall right back into the pit. So I'd say this mouse has got to step up on this kind of thinking. No one calls for justice, nor does any plead for truth, except in the house of Yahweh. They trust in vanity, confusion, and speak lies. The next point I want you to realize is that Yahweh does provide an answer. And Yahweh started the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program for the purpose to bring peace to the world, and not just the world, but the whole universe eventually. Isaiah 58, praise Yahweh. He gives us further instruction in verse 13. If you'd turn away your foot from breaking the Sabbath. And of course, in Daniel 7:25, we see that the Pope, the Catholic Church, the fourth beast of the Roman Empire, they called the Holy Roman Empire, led this fight against the Sabbath days and the feast days and sought to change the times and the laws. So if the Sabbath were kept and these laws are, once they are taught, then the people will no longer have to be running from their countries, because running from your countries isn't going to solve the problem either. That's not the answer. The answer is being taught the way to peace, and that's the purpose of the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program. And that's what will turn this whole thing around. And that's when the people will find their joy in Yahweh, and Yahweh will cause us to ride upon the high places. And what brings peace? It's righteousness and, living according to Yahweh's laws that will bring this result to live in peace. The fourth thing is to realize that we, the house of Yahweh, is the only light in the world. So we need to be holding up our personal light, our example, to others. We need to be holding up a righteous example, keeping a guard over our mouths, our tongues, so we speak in a positive light, not to be tearing anything down, that's righteous or holy or led by Yahweh or inspired by Yahweh. You, the house of Yahweh, is the light of the world. At this time, you're the only light, the true light that's coming forth to the world. Now, they know it's expensive, it's costly, is that, like we read back there, $400 million in damage. It's costly to deal with the problems in society. And they try to make out like they don't have enough wealth. Well, they're right about that. There's not enough wealth in the whole world to pay for the curse, the solution, or to pay for the curses from sin, the result of sin, all the consequences of man going his own way, creating all these problems. There's not enough money in the whole world to pay for the consequence of sin. But there is plenty of money to take care of the needs of the people, and truly the need of the people is to teach them true knowledge and righteous character. There's no doubt that there's enough wealth for everyone. You know, the majority of the world today, though, they don't want solutions. They only seek their own advantage. But that's not the example that Yeshua set for us. He sacrificed his life for us. And he taught this in his example. He taught the law. And he taught this service mind and attitude. But there is enough wealth for everyone. It's just unevenly distributed because of the greed and illegal lust that are going on. And, you know, this isn't talking about communism and socialism. This is talking about the results of greed and illegal lust. That's what's stripping the wealth from the people. If things were managed honestly and fairly and justly, there's more than enough wealth to take care of the needs of the people. And finally, we'll conclude on this point, because there is hope for us, for mankind, for the universe. We are going to be able to rule the universe, to rule it, but you'll rule it with peace, not with hatred and war like you're seeing here today. You're going to be teaching the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program, and you'll be governing the world with that peaceful solution. Nothing else. And that's what's going to guide us through all eternity, brethren, and it's what's going to guide the entire universe. Psalm 149, verse 4. Because Yahweh takes pleasure in his people. And how is it that Yahweh can take pleasure in his people? Because his people are like Abraham. They're taught his laws. They're taught to be obedient. They carry out that obedience, and they do the things which are pleasing to Yahweh. Because Yahweh takes pleasure in his people, he will beautify the meek, the humble. Think of these attributes in relation to ourselves, to yourself, with salvation. May Yahweh bless your understanding. And Pastor continues to show us this love by giving us correction and setting forth the pattern of righteousness in our lives continually. May Yahweh bless your understanding. Have a joyous Sabbath. Praise Yahweh.